Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. I'm your host, Kristen Harcourt, and I am really, really super pumped. I know you hear me say this all the time, but I truly am super pumped. And it's because I bring amazing people on the show. And I cannot wait to introduce you to our guest today, who's Hamza Khan, who is a best-selling author, award-winning entrepreneur, and world-renowned keynote speaker whose TED Talk, Stop Managing, Start Leading, has been viewed over 2 million times. He challenges audience and organizations to rehumanize their workplaces to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth. He is a visiting scholar, top ranked university educator, and respected thought leader with actionable insights featured by the likes of Inc., Vice, and Business Insider. The world's leading organizations trust Hamza to enhance modern leadership, inspire purposeful productivity, nurturing lasting resilience, and navigate constant change. He has spoken on various global stages from the World Youth Forum to TEDx and works with clients such as Microsoft, PepsiCo, LinkedIn, Deloitte, Salesforce, and TikTok, and hundreds of colleges and universities. Through his writing, speaking, teaching, and executive coaching, Hamza empowers people to thrive in the future of work. Welcome to the show, my friends.
Kristen, oh my goodness, 11 out of 10. That bio trips up a lot of speakers because there is a plethora of comments and varying sentence structures, but oh my goodness, you got it. One take. And you have the most gentle, soothing, nurturing, warm voice. It was made for this format, this medium, and it's just such a delight to hear you, to be speaking with you, to be in this orbit of the community of leaders at all levels, new leaders, emerging leaders, leaders further along in their career. Thank you for thinking of me as worthy to be in this pantheon of incredible leading thinkers and thought leaders. Thank you. It means a lot.
I am receiving that fully and was super excited to give a little bit background for our audience. So Hamza and I were both at the Work Human conference. We happened to sit down beside each other. I was immediately like, who's this person in this energy? And then we just started talking and just speaking the same language. And it's just amazing, I think, when people are doing this work in the world and just really coming from your heart in such a passionate way, it's almost like we just find each other. The energy brings us together. And I said right away, I said, you know what? We both, again, happened to be from Toronto at a conference in Austin, which might have not been the case. And I said, I have to have you on the podcast. I can't wait to have a dialogue. And here we are making it happen.
Wow. Wow. That is special. And I love that our nexus point through which we met each other was Work Human. And that was a really special opportunity for me. I was invited to speak. Huge thank you to my bureau, Speaker Spotlight, for so expertly connecting the right speaker with the right audience at the right time, the right message really with the right audience at the right time. And I was contracted by Work Human to speak on the topic of brave new work, to speak about the future of work. And I remember a week before, I just felt a pull. I felt a pull to this community of bold leaders, HR champions, and change makers to say something that I don't think I've ever had a chance to say, which is the full story of what happened to me the day after the TEDx talk that you referenced in the bio, Kristen. Um, I disassociate a little bit whenever people mention that TEDx talk. It is what I'm best known for, I should say. Those four words: stop managing, start leading. As you said, it's 2 million plus views. Last I checked, I think it was like 2.6 or something, which is wild. I can't wrap my head around that number. People have taken those words, they've taken those ideas. It's featured in textbooks and classrooms the world over. And yet it was probably one of the worst decisions I ever made in my life to deliver that TEDx talk, because the day after is when I fell victim to and if there was a better word that I could use, I would use it, Kristen, but I fell victim to an abusive boss. And I have been masking the pain and the extent to which I was subject to the will of this narcissistic, Machiavellian, and I would even say subclinical or full clinical psychopathic leader. And I just felt permission in your presence, in the presence of your fellow HR professionals at WorkHuman, to tell that story fully, or as fully as I could. And I remember being up on stage and my voice was cracking and I could barely get through the sentence. And I felt so held by this
Mm.
community of HR professionals, HR champions, bold leaders, change makers, and people who understood that leadership needs to be reinvented, which is conveniently the name of my most recent book. So all of this is to say, Kristen, thank you again. I feel like I will just heap effusive praise on you throughout this entire relationship. But at risk of turning this into, celebrate Kristen episode, celebrate Kristen, which I would love to do, I will turn it back to you, my friend.
Yeah, and I really connected when you and when we briefly spoke, you talked a little bit around you. I think you had just done the talk actually, and I was so moved by your courage and vulnerability and bravery to
Thank
really
you.
share that. And I really think other people can see themselves in your story because, there's going to be a whole spectrum, but I think too many of us have worked with, been with, suffered through toxic bosses, toxic
Right.
leaders. And what I'm also going to share here too is it's not just the toxic bosses, it's also the bystanders in the
Hmm.
organization that are tolerating and knowing that this behavior is happening and
Wow.
allowing it to continue. And I think everyone would be so blessed and lucky to hear a little bit more about your story. And we'll let it go wherever it goes.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
co-creating. So, share wherever you want to start around, where you began, I think was beautiful around after the TEDx and realized it was, it brought up a lot for you. And
Sure.
so tell us a little bit more about that story.
Okay. Well, here goes. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the space to unpack this without the pressure of being on stage and, having the slides and needing to be theatrical and all that. I think I can really just sort of feel this while I'm sitting down. So I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to unpack this with you. I will request one thing, Kristen, because I do tend to get tripped up when I tell this story just because of how heavy it is. But please remind me to come back to, if I forget, the toxic triangle, which you alluded to, because we don't talk enough about the conformers and the colluders and the unstable environment that props up a toxic leader. So let me take you back. The year is 2014, I believe. That is when I experienced face to face the first time, um, the most raw expression of the dark core of leadership. Now, before I get to that, I joined an organization. I think this was in 2012. It was then called Ryerson University, which you're familiar with and you alluded to, Kristen. And now it's known as Toronto Metropolitan U, although because it was called Ryerson University, named after somebody who was instrumental in in the residential schooling and system, the very problematic residential schooling system in Canada. That should have been a red flag altogether. So, but that an organization permitted that name to last as long as it did. That's neither here nor there. I joined this organization at a time in my career where I felt I had been editing myself to fit into spaces. I didn't feel like I belonged for a whole host of reasons. A lot of them have to do with my intersectionality and how I present with a name like Hamza Khan, looking the way I look, the beard, so on and so forth. I had been editing myself until I felt there was almost nothing left. And so I joined this organization and I remember sitting front row at a new employee orientation, hearing my boss on stage. And my boss says the words that are music to my ears. He says, "I want you all to bring your whole selves to work."
Mm.
Oh my goodness. He was throwing me a sort of, what do you call those little life things? Those little life preservers. It was a life preserver, right? A
Yes.
little life thing. He threw that at me, and I was like, what do you mean, bring my whole self to work? I'm happy to just again mold and reshape to be whatever you need me to be. No, he said it again. Bring your whole self to work. It was a refrain, and so I did, Kristen. I felt galvanized. I brought the part of myself whose parents, grandparents, and great grandparents endured the legacy of colonization, whose very DNA resists autocracy. I brought the part of myself who was raised on the rebellious, revolutionary, creative, entrepreneurial spirit of hip hop, who liked to move fast, tinker, hustle, break things, and just, find a way. I brought the part of myself who was a young leader in a zeitgeist that was experiencing the transition in generations from Gen X to Gen Y and soon to Gen Z. And I was surrounded by people who were much older than me, who were the same age as me or slightly younger than me. And I realized very quickly that I could not exert my will on them. I could not induce obedience by being a top-down, authoritarian, autocratic, avoidant leader, that I had to really leverage influence and emotional intelligence and deep listening to influence these people to achieve a common aim, which I think is the most raw definition of the sort of pro-social approach to leadership. Anyways, I brought that whole self to work. And
Mhm.
Kristen, it was working. It worked magically. That confluence of factors led to us as a team achieving national and international acclaim. In under 2 years, we won, I think, a total of 9 awards.
Wow.
We established Ryerson University then as a national leader in online student engagement. Um, and the people that I had the privilege of working with, they went on to have remarkable, storied careers working at some of the world's top agencies, starting organizations. In fact, one person that I worked with full circle has now become my social media manager. And this person is probably making way more money than I am or could ever dream of. And I'm just so proud that like we were all part of this golden age of employee engagement. And a thing happens when you become your whole self is that you start to then push up against the membrane, the veil of becoming your best self. And I
Right.
felt that it was coming, Kristen. And
Yeah.
I got invited to deliver a TEDx talk. And I felt it was time. I felt it was time to just say the words that were inside my soul, to express them. And I got on stage and I said the words, stop managing, start leading. I promoted the
Mhm.
idea back then of flexible work, of remote work, of being a coach-like leader that stands on the sidelines and cheers their team on, that empowers their team and encourages them to win championships. That was me. That was what I was doing. Now, what's interesting, Kristen, and I'll bring the story to a close, or at least to the 2014 transition point, I should say. Let me bring the premise to a close. Uh, ooh, my goodness. Sitting in the audience was my boss,
Mm,
and the tables had turned.
mm,
Whereas 2 years ago, I was sitting in the audience looking up at my boss. Now the opposite was happening. He was sitting in the audience looking up at me. And I think he was hearing me, but he wasn't listening to me.
mm,
Because if you are a dark core leader, you don't
mm,
just have one of the traits, you have all of them. And so the thing that made him an expert strategist, which I would describe as Machiavellianism,
mm,
also was adjacent to narcissism. And I
mm,
don't think in that moment his ego could handle that his protege was doing something that he wished he could do.
mm.
And I don't know how else to express that without sounding arrogant. And I promise you, I'm saying this with the utmost humility. Were the tables turned, were he my protege up on stage, I would have been so happy for him. I would have been so proud of him. I would have said, keep going. You go, spread your wings, fly.
Yes.
And I was outshining him.
Mhm,
And he, at the end of the event, congratulated me in front of his peers, in front of my peers. And I thought I did a great job. But that night, I got a text message from him. And he says, come to my office the next morning. And so here I am thinking, wow, okay, this boss who has gone on record to describe me as the most delightful employee that he's ever worked with multiple times. You can even find this expression online where he said it.
yeah.
I think, yeah, it's all going to be hunky dory. You know, there's going to be opportunities to sort of spread this into a larger program, so on and so forth. So the next morning I go into his office and Kristen, his demeanor changed. He was not the same person. The light in his eyes was gone. He didn't even offer me a seat. He just proceeded to immediately lambast me, to pillory me, to tar and feather me. He said that he was ashamed, he was disappointed, he was embarrassed. He said that the ideas that I was promoting on stage were seditious, they were undermining his authority. And he insisted in that moment that I write him not a reference letter, I write him an apology letter, and I write an apology letter to all of his peers, walking back my statements, saying that those things that I was doing with my team, promoting this more human-centric, theory Y-rooted approach to leadership was it was all is all fictitious. It was all a thought experiment that I wasn't really doing these things. Um,
Ah,
and I said no, Kristen. I made the mistake of saying no because I, at this point, had now transitioned. I now become the thing that he asked me to become. I became my
right,
whole self, and in becoming my whole self, I
right.
became my best self. And
Which I have to stop for a second, must
please,
feel
please, please.
so confusing.
Oh my God.
Here you are, right? So you're listening to the message, you're hearing the story, you're hearing the vision, and you're
Right,
saying, okay, I'm
right,
stepping up into. And this is one of those moments, one of the biggest, I would say, moments in your life. You're on the TEDx stage and you
right.
are showing up as your beautiful, authentic
Sure. Thank
self.
you. Yeah.
In that moment, you're being told, no, 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 no. Like I can't even imagine the level of shame and confusion and all the things that must have been running through you.
Kristen, I appreciate that. It was truly disassociating. I experienced or like the cognitive dissonance was so strong. It just didn't feel real. I sort of experienced an out of body moment when this was happening because I thought I was following the playbook that he laid out for me. And when I said no, he immediately began to manage me in that moment. I mean, he just started to strong arm me without physically touching me, but using his words, using his presence, using his demeanor. And I think he realized in that moment that I was not going to be managed because no, this was it. Right. I finally had my identity back. And I think he accepted in that moment that when leaders start managing, employees stop following. Right. When leaders start managing, employees stop following. And so he did the next thing that he could. He tried to fire me, except I was a unionized employee and I was a high performer. In his words, I was the most delightful employee he's ever worked with. I made him look like a rock star all the time. Um, because it was difficult for him to let go of me, he then made my life a living hell for the next year and some change. He activated the dark core of leadership. And the dark core of leadership is rooted in this idea of the dark core of personality, which is described as the tendency to maximize one's individual utility, what's good for me, while accepting, neglecting, or provoking the disutility of others. Think about every Disney villain you've ever seen. Like it's all about them. They're extending their long, unnatural life. They are maximizing all of their acquisition of wealth. They're hoarding while other people are experiencing distress, duress, harm, so on and so forth. And how that presented itself was quite innocuous at first. It was, you know, sending me emails after 5 p.m. Then those emails went into the night. Then they went into weekends. Then on vacations. Suddenly I'm being denied vacations, denied raises, denied promotions. Next thing you know, resources are being taken away from me. Next thing you know, every email I sent, every text message I sent, every tweet I put out into the world is being micromanaged, is being edited. I'm receiving requests to take things down all the time. And by the end of it, Kristen, I am having rumors spread about me. I'm being dragged into meetings with human resources, being dragged into meetings with the Human Rights Commission, to sort of parry all of these challenges that are now converging on me. And I'll say this: I have a pretty high threshold for experiencing sort of textbook abuse, leadership abuse. Let me be specific because you got to keep in mind, I was a reservist in the Canadian Armed Forces at the height of the War on Terror with my intersectionality. And that's all I can say without violating an NDA. So what my boss was doing, it was small, but given a wide enough time scale, death by 1,000 cuts. And towards the end of my time, Kristen, my goodness, the Sunday scaries. Sunday night, I could not sleep. I would cry on the way to work. I would sometimes cry at work and on the way home from work. And this happened for days and weeks. And, even, oh my goodness. Wow. Even going to the campus these days, uh, it makes my stomach churn. There's a physical reaction to it. Uh, and let's just call it what it is. It was traumatizing. I
Exactly.
can't discount just how traumatizing it was. And there was so much shame tied up in this because I remember telling some of my closest colleagues that this was happening and they could not believe it. They were like, what, him? No way. No, that guy? He's lovely. Everybody loves him. Come on. And one person even said, it sounds like you wow, what a problematic comment. She said to me, it sounds like you want to participate in the oppression Olympics. I mean, I was smacked down.
Hamza.
So let me just fast forward this story, Kristen, and thank you for being so patient as I unpack this. How it ended was, um, he was unceremoniously exited from the organization. And any good leader is able to create systems that last and voluntary replication of leadership and culture. If you're a dark core leader, you do the exact opposite because you've made it all about yourself. The minute you leave, it collapses overnight. So
Mm.
almost overnight, the culture collapsed. And you can talk to anybody who was around that time that we were working together. You can talk to people now. There's no discernible fingerprint of this person even existing. All of that they've built has just disappeared. It's vanished, just like themselves. And I hear they've now become an angry person on Facebook. That's what I've been told.
Right.
And the frustrating thing, Kristen, is that I don't even think they know what they did. They're not even thinking about me. I'm an afterthought.
Yeah.
Probably don't even remember my face or my name. But I was the one who burned out.
Yeah.
I was the one who last year I was diagnosed with CPTSD.
Yeah.
I and I don't know if I can ever get rid of it. It's just a part of me now. Like every time I stand on stage, even now when I'm sharing this story with you, I'm trying my best to be my whole self, to be my best self. But I'm hearing my boss's voice undercutting me. Even in sharing the story with you right now,
Yeah.
I'm actually concerned that by putting this out into the world, that I'm inviting this person to come back into my life and
Yeah.
to say, I can't believe you said that.
Yeah.
And here's how I'm going to punish you.
Yeah.
Whew. All of this is to say, my friend, this is real. This happened. And I wish this was the exception to the rule, but unfortunately, the data suggests that this is a lot more common than we think.
Oh,
Um, I
so
would even
much
argue
more.
that this is the status quo.
First of all, Hamza, I just really, really want to acknowledge how brave it was for you, even in this moment, to share and to be on those stages and share. I am so sorry that you had to endure that. Such harmful behavior. And it's not okay. It's not right. And of course, that voice is still there because when someone's gaslighting you like that, it
Yeah.
just you question what reality is, right? Like we see this unfortunately in domestic violence and these
Yep.
abusive relationships as well, right? It gets to such a point where the manipulation is just done in such an effective way because they're so good at it that
Mm-hmm.
you're constantly questioning yourself and I'm somehow not seeing reality, right? And then of course when we start to have the narcissist, and there's been research, I remember reading a book in HR when I was doing my HR courses. I think it was called Men and Snakes
Snakes
and
in
Suits.
Suits, the
Snakes
seminal
in
book. Yeah, yeah,
suits,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
8 to 10% of CEOs are that sociopathic personality because
Right.
with that ability to be able to be so charismatic and say the right things to the right people. And then it's so confusing. And I have been around this personality early in my career. And it was so confusing because this person is one there in front of everyone else. They can be this one
Sure.
personality, then behind closed doors, this
Yes.
completely different person comes out, which is a little bit trickier because they are so good at manipulating, right? But I don't want to lose what you had said. And I've kept the thread around the kind of the
Triangle.
drama triangle
Yes. The
and
drama
what
triangle. Yeah.
happens there, because we're going to unpack this now in terms of, there's going to be other people who are listening right now and they've been through this kind of situation. And I hope that through them hearing your story, they feel less alone. But also, what are we going to do? And what does that look like to make sure that this doesn't keep on being repeated?
Oh my goodness. I mean, the first thing I would recommend is that every leader needs to hire Kristen Harcourt, an emotional intelligence coach. You might think you're emotionally intelligent, but until you're making this practice and the intentional thinking about this consistent and not occasional, it's really not going to sink in. I think we just need to overhaul leadership development as a practice. We'll get into that. But thank you for, first of all, again, just really holding me as I shared this story. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Mhm.
Let's connect it back to the toxic triangle. And in fact, I want to even take it a step further and reconnect it with something that one of your guests said recently. And I hope I'm pronouncing their name correctly. Was it Ghislaine?
Gline
Ghislaine,
like
Ghislaine,
shine. Yes.
Ghislaine like shine. Ooh, I
Yes.
love that so much. Ghislaine, I love that episode that you did with Ghislaine. It was one of your most recent episodes at the time of this recording. And she described hypos, high performers. And I would identify even now as a high performer. And so what was disorienting for me was that I was in a culture of high performance as a high performer. in hindsight, maybe an insecure overachiever. That's a whole other can of worms. And my boss's criticism was being registered as I'm not doing enough. I'm falling short. And so I made the mistake of just digging my heels in, rolling up my sleeves and taking on more work. I think it was Glenn who said, if you want something done, or maybe it was you, Kristen, who said, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. And so here I am just saddling myself. The 40-hour work week became a 50, became a 60, became a 70-hour work week. Before you knew it, I was working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week. And I would receive compliments very sparingly. It was used as like as sort of like a Pavlovian. Yeah, I mean, it was dark in hindsight what was happening. And the reason why it was happening in hindsight, now understanding this and now studying at the graduate level, the psychology of leadership, is what had fermented in the organization in a very progressive culture was a toxic triangle of leadership. And let me just qualify how progressive this place was. Toronto Metropolitan University, Ryerson University, when I showed up, had won the DEI award, the National DEI Award, 5 years in a row, awarded by the Globe and Mail for the #1 employer in Canada that engendered workplace belonging because they operationalized and maximized diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that is the culture that I joined. And in that culture, what had happened in our department was you had a toxic triangle who was behaving like a petty. You had at the top of the first vertex, at the top of the triangle was this petty tyrant in the form of my boss, who was a full dark core leader expressing narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, which are the three elements of the dark triad of leadership. And then what they had done by virtue of exerting themselves is create a culture on the other vertex of the triangle of conformity and collusion. So you have that culture of people that are just bending to the will of the leader, or who are aware at least at a subconscious level that what's happening here is unethical, but they're going to go along with it for their own gain because they're conditioned to want to achieve a level of success that is modeled by that boss. And then on the final vertex of that toxic triangle, you have the unstable environment that is comprised of a couple of things. It's a lack of governance. So, it's just flimsy rules that can be bent and broken. You have a perceived threat. So there's always this false sense of competition when in fact we are in the most positive sum environment that I can think of, which is higher education, helping students make the transition from high school through post-secondary to their dream jobs. It doesn't have to be competitive. We're not in the theater of war. And then on top of that, you have it was lack of governance, perceived threat, and instability, just general instability. And so this boss would behave it was very mercurial. You didn't know what version you were going to get. And everyone was on eggshells. And so that happened. But because I was so immersed in it, because I was so caught up on pleasing this one person, I did not notice how much this culture had devolved until I
Mm.
had left the organization.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that is the case. There are things that people can pay attention to now, hopefully, because we're having conversations like this, and leadership assessments have become more sophisticated, and part of the lexicon is concepts like workplace culture, belonging, psychological safety, emotional intelligence, and all that. But back then, we're talking about 2014, all
Mhm.
these ideas were just bubbling up, at least
Mhm.
as they play out in the modern workplace. I'm sure psychologists and coaches and leading thinkers and thought leaders at the time were all thinking about it. But for the average employee, we're still operating in an old paradigm rooted in the status quo that harkens back all the way to the 19th century. Yes. Thank you for allowing me to sort of unpack that.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to explain what's happening there because it reminds me also in a different way. I heard Simon Sinek speak 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe it was before I always say pre or post pandemic. So I think it was before the pandemic. So maybe 2019. And he was talking about the brilliant a-hole. And he's
Yeah.
like, you can always ask around and everyone knows like, who's that person that shouldn't be here anymore? And everyone knows who that person is. They immediately say the same name. And like you were saying, in terms of hitting numbers, doing performance, all of that kind of stuff, it's like they look the other way because we're achieving this piece. We're just going to pretend and not look at this other piece over here. And I think you're right in terms of it's interesting when I look at what's happened in terms of progress, I think there's more awareness. Do I think that, as you said, that this kind of behavior is still happening? Absolutely. I think that again, reasons why it's tolerated is okay, we're hitting our numbers, we need to get these business outcomes, and it is tolerated and at a very, very, very high cost. Never mind from a humanity, which is huge, huge.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
I think everyone listening, like let's just bring in the humanity piece. Like it's not okay. It's not
No,
okay for this to be happening at any time in workplaces. But I also think in terms of what we see going on in organizations, I think you've talked a little bit about burnout and some of the other things as well. um we still have to get at the roots. Like we still have to stop putting on band-aids and get
yeah,
at systemically, which I think you would agree to. When we start to look at the DEI, we know that the DEI work and belonging, it's never done, it's never going to be
no,
finished, it's
no,
forever. But to get at the systems that are underneath and what's happening here. And I think there's such an opportunity, because when I start to think about workplaces and people spend hours, as you were saying, 40, 50, 60, 70 hours in workplaces, this could actually be a place where a lot of healing happens if we start to look at things differently.
truly, Kristen, couldn't have said it better. I I think back to who I had become in 2014, and it's so interesting you say that everyone in the organization knows who that brilliant a-hole is, and I think that was me towards the end because I was emulating my boss. And I remember that my team came to me and said, Hamza, like you are now part of the in group. Do you know that you are part of a clique in the organization? I'm like, what do you mean part of a clique? They're like, you never meet with us anymore. You cancel one-on-ones. You're always hanging out with the boss and your fellow lieutenants, as they call them. And I was like, oh, shoot, you're right. If a calendar is a reflection of my priorities, and my priorities are clearly to be kissing ass. And I mean, pardon my language, I said brilliant a-hole, then I just dropped, the A word
It's all
just a few
good.
seconds
It's all
ago.
good.
So yes, um, my goodness, I snapped out of it once my team had pointed out that I had become blind to the fact that I was now emulating my boss in trying to curry favor and get out of this hole that he had put me into, that I was just digging myself further into. And so when I snapped out of that, that only served to enrage my boss even further. And then he just applied himself full court onto dehumanizing behavior. And I remember feeling at the end of that campaign of abuse that not only was I a bad employee by his standards, but I was unhappy. I was miserable. I was surviving. I was suffering. But it wasn't just relegated to the world of work. Because I was a miserable employee, I was also a miserable son. I was a miserable friend. I was a miserable partner. I was a miserable mentor. I was a miserable mentee. I was a miserable teacher, so on and so forth. I was a miserable person. And that is the thing that is lost, to your point, in these organizations. It is morally not okay, but it seeps. The line that separates, I mean, this is not severance. We don't have the ability to just check out once we walk into our workplaces or log on to Teams or Zoom. We're still the same people, and we bring that stress home with us all the time. And the extent to which the average employee is having a bad day at work boggles my mind. But I have to remind myself in all of this, Kristen, and I say this hand to heart, and I'm making eye contact with you. Like, please tell me if you feel any insincerity coming from me. But like, as upset and frustrated as I am with my boss, it's been 10 years, and I will not name them. I
Mm,
refuse to. I
mhm,
it First of all, it's not their story. It's my
mhm,
story.
mhm,
They are not the main character in this narrative. I am,
mhm,
but I
mhm,
forgive them, and I'm not
mhm.
mad at them. I want to be so mad at them. I really want to. I want to repeat. There's a part of me that I have worked really hard to suppress, that
Yeah.
has wanted to for a very long time, to make them feel what I felt, because I'm sure that they were just repeating a pattern of abuse that they experienced from their boss or someone in their lives. But it ends with us. It ends with conversations like this, and I have to remind myself that before they were a monster manager, they were probably a cute, wonderful, delightful
Right.
baby.
Right.
And
I know. I
it's
know.
it's the environment that warped them. It really is. And
It's
the further I get in my education, the more I realize I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? People are born with certain predilections, but they're not oriented towards abuse and harm and violence. Sure, it's our brain during times of stress and fear, we revert back to a primitive part of ourselves, a primitive part of our brain optimized for survival in a savanna environment. But we have evolved. This has been a 4 million year journey for us to discover that we are much more human than we are warriors who are trying to prevent predation by big cats. And so something must have gone wrong in this person's environment that led them to act out the way that they did. And I have a lot of grace for them.
I mean, I think it's so important what you're saying because both can be true, right? When you see
Mhm.
that, I've thought of that when I thought of some politicians in the world right now, and I'm like, okay, just see 5-year-old, his 5-year-old, like he was this beautiful little 5-year-old, and his
Yeah.
path took him on a different path, and
Yeah.
both can be true, and that still means you're holding your boundaries. You're very cognizant of what energy you're exposing yourself to. And I think we recognize that forgiveness and acceptance is not saying it was okay. We do it. There was a great quote around this is because for you not to accept and to be holding it on is like you drinking the poison and that person's out there partying.
So good. Wow. Thank you for reminding me of that proverb, that idiom. That's a really good one. And that's exactly what I was experiencing. It's taken me a long time, a lot of therapy, a lot of coaching, a lot of solitude and meditation to recognize that I'm not actually mad at this person.
Yeah.
I forgive them. In fact, in a weird Stockholmy way, I kind of miss working with them because when it was good, it was really good. We both looked like
Right.
rock stars. When
Yeah.
I was engaged, when I felt like I was being rewarded for being my best self, my whole self at work,
Yeah.
we were unstoppable. And
Right.
there's a part of me that misses that high, that misses that level of performance and camaraderie. And mind you, I was making $35,000 before taxes
Yeah.
and I had nothing else going on other than this, and I was as happy as a clam. I would have
Yeah.
stayed. I would have stayed, and I would have endured being underpaid, overworked, had I received any consistent reward, fairness, alignment of values, control over my workload, um, control over my portfolio of work, so on and so forth. Those upstream factors, which I realize
Yeah.
now in hindsight, are part of that system that you were alluding
Yes.
to. um, I thought that the solution for beating burnout and drumming up my engagement was my own. I felt that individual interventions were necessary. And that's so much of what the $200 billion a year leadership development industry peddles. They peddle this idea that the individual, the onus is on them to become a better leader, to become more productive, to beat burnout. But we know, and this has been a consistent theme across your show here, is that it's the system really. And so, what are those upstream factors that result in disengagement? Dr. Christina Maslach, considered to be the godmother of modern burnout research, describes them as fairness, values, control, workload, reward, and community.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, and Kristen, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. Like, what are the system level interventions that we need? But I think that all of those things fall within the purview of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think
Mm-hmm.
you've identified that through your podcast, through your show.
Yeah.
What do you see from all these conversations that you've had? I think we're on episode 115 now, last I checked.
Yes, yes,
Holy
you're right. I
smokes.
appreciate you spending the time and
I
checking
do my
that out.
homework.
I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
that. I
What are the
mean,
threads
here's
that you've picked up on? Yeah.
I mean, I think this is what it really comes down to. It's both, right? So at the individual level, I think we all need to look inward and go on our own journey and really ask ourselves who we are and what matters and what is
Mm,
true and what we will take responsibility for in terms of how we're showing up. When I look at all the times I get triggered, it's like when I say all the time, when I'm in awareness and I'm the observer and I'm watching my triggers, I can see, oh, this is my work. This is now for like what's going on with me that this situation is impacting me in this way. Because so often we'll point our fingers out there. Well, the external needs to change.
right.
But so often it's like, well, what's going on internally for me? What conversation am I not having? What boundary am I not holding? Where am I not being in self integrity around what really matters to me? Where do I need to apologize for how I might have shown up? I mean, my
Wow.
kids, my 11 and 14-year-old are the best at holding up a mirror and saying like,
Nice.
I didn't really appreciate how impatient you were yesterday. And I was like, I appreciate that you have the language to be able to reflect that back to me. And I'm not
Yeah.
going to have shame around that. I'm going to say, I'm a mom, I'm human, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not going to shame myself for it, but I'm going to have a lot of self compassion. So I think there's that individual level, but
Mm,
then, so, what are we continuing to do in creating work? And then as an organization, how are we creating an environment that
Yeah.
supports that. Yes, we're working together for a common mission and vision, and hopefully creating amazing things that we're putting out into the world and making a positive impact on what we're creating. I tend to want to work with organizations that are continuing to evolve and innovate so that they are creating services or goods that are helping to bring this world forward
Hmm.
and sustainability and B Corps and all of that. I'm very passionate about that.
Wow.
But then, getting underneath that, right? Like, what are we doing to create that culture and be able to create an environment where everyone is thriving together
Yes.
towards these common goals? That's kind of how I would sum it up. Thank you for
Oh my
asking the
God.
question.
Kristen Harcourt for prime minister and president, you name it. It's interesting you actually brought up, you made reference to politicians right now. Um, are you familiar with the work of Dr. James Penbaker, who wrote
No,
about
I'm
therapeutic
not.
writing? So
No.
interesting. He's done extensive writing on the power of reflective writing, of just being in solitude and just taking 25 minutes and writing whatever comes to mind and
Yeah,
allowing yourself to process those feelings and look inward,
yeah,
and to operationalize exactly what you said, just that realization necessary for leaders to better manage themselves so that they can better manage others or lead others.
yeah.
And very interestingly, I found a paper or study that he led, in which he found that leaders who occupy a higher social status in an organization, who are much more comfortable, who are much more secure, who are able to engender influence among their followers, use a lot more group pronouns. So they use us, we,
Yes, yes,
they,
yes,
and so on and so forth. I don't know why I'm blanking on like the full array of
yes,
group pronouns. And
yeah,
leaders who are much more fearful and insecure use a lot more personal pronouns, me, I, so on and so forth. And what's
yes.
interesting is I read that and I was like, I wonder. Let's see if we can, extract some insights into what we feel intuitively about the current array of candidates running for office. And I just picked
Mhm.
the US elections.
Mm,
And so I took the most recent speeches
mm.
from the presidential candidates and the vice
Yes,
presidential candidates,
yes,
and I ran them through ChatGPT and I said,
yes,
"Oh, great machine,
yeah,
can you parse out how many times each of them use group pronouns and individual pronouns?"
yes,
And it should come as no surprise to
yes,
people who have felt for a very long time that at least one of these candidates is really in it for themselves. The ratio was wild. It was like 80-20 for personal pronouns versus group pronouns. And I was like, how can people not see this? Because
yes,
in the moment, they are
yes,
also experiencing fear. And that seems to be the prevailing emotion that this leader in particular is preying upon. And
yeah,
so I wonder, what is the opposite of fear? If we know that like fear is being weaponized in 2024, if we know that the current status quo is built on fear, specifically fear of the great man theory of leadership that has blossomed, or whatever would be sort of like an ugly equivalent of blossom that has festered into this modern organization through which a dark core leader can slip through the cracks of modern HR. What is the opposite of fear? And I
mhm,
asked this question recently at a
mhm,
conference, CPHR Alberta,
mhm.
and I was surprised to see that majority of the attendees selected love as the opposite of fear.
Yeah.
And I can't help but notice, Kristen, but behind you is a sign that says, all you need
Yes,
is love.
yes,
And when we talk about love in the workplace, I know that there's some HR professionals who are like, oh, hold on, this is causing all kinds of problems here. I mean, what do you mean love in the workplace? Let's be clear. I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about platonic love. I'm talking about the multiple definitions of love. In fact, I would use sort of like a bell Hooksian definition, which is the the ability to extend oneself, one's will, for the spiritual development of another, however you choose to describe that. I
yes.
would love to ask you, if we have time, Kristen, somebody as uh, who has academic and practitioner pedigree like yourself, who is called to walk on stages, to coach and to consult with organizations across the world. How do you package that philosophy that is deserving of hanging up in your
Mm,
office
mm,
for these audiences? Because
mm.
I'm struggling with that. I would love to get any insight from you on this.
Yeah, I mean, I have that there deliberately to remind every leader when I'm talking to them because I truly believe it's about leading with head and heart.
Oof.
And I was going to say the same thing when you said that the opposite of fear is love.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
we could also say the opposite. When you're going into fear, what are you doing? You're going into survival and scarcity. So instead of going
exactly.
into survival and scarcity, you're going into abundance, you're going into
Thriving.
love, you're going
Yeah,
into curiosity, you're going into, which of course is such a much more empowering feeling.
yeah.
And what happens as well, we have so many leaders that are operating from the head up, right? So it's
Yep.
dropping down, which is why I'm so passionate about mindfulness as well, because it's helping people to get into their body. Like your body knows how
I
it feels.
know.
It doesn't feel good when you're
Yeah,
going
yeah.
into fear. Nobody's in fear thinking, oh, this feels amazing, right? Like it doesn't. I think that there's definitely an appetite and a shift happening where we can say love. We can say love in the workplace. I use the word compassion for many, many
Yeah,
years, and I think compassion could be received in a way that felt, because the word love has so many connotations around it. So where they get stuck in romantic love, and it's like we're not
exactly.
talking romantic love here. But I love your rehumanizing. I mean, I've been saying humanize work for 15 plus years, which is why, to circle back, I love it because this is where we started.
Yep.
To circle back to Work Human, the first year I went to Work Human, which was 2015, it was
Wow.
me and one other token Canadian. There were two Canadians, and there was only 200 people that year, right? It was the first time they were doing the conference. And what attracted to me, they had me at Work Human. Like all I needed to hear was the human. Like it's
Yeah.
all about humanity and humanizing and rehumanizing, as you said. And I think everybody at their core, that's actually what they truly want. It's what they want. They're just not going about it the right way.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I was a little disappointed earlier this year when Brian Chesky was on a podcast with Adam Grant, and he walked back his statements about treating your workplace like family. And I was like,
Mm,
no, Brian, you had the right idea. Like, don't shy
yes,
away from that. And they
yes,
were doing mental gymnastics about how a workplace should be like a high performance team. And I'm like, no, this is all bullshit because these people are spending majority of their waking hours with you. They're spending more time with you, leader, and colleagues than there are with their own families. So offer them something that is at the very least at the same level or respectful and mindful of the trade-off, the opportunity cost, which is being with your 11 and 14-year-old
yeah,
children. And
yeah,
I think that that is a low bar, if you ask me. And I love that you said that it's unnatural. Like people don't want to be in the place of fear. And yet the workplace is predicated on that feeling of fear. If you even just think about how somebody like my boss was attracted to their position, then you can start to see, you can start to reverse engineer just how much the workplace is predicated on fear. Number one, they had to um, they had to make themselves appear to be a lot more competent than they were because they were essentially in competition with other applicants. So
yeah,
that right away attracts and rewards a narcissist, somebody who's able to engage in self-aggrandizement. And so this person did a great job of creating a package, an exterior that probably said all the right things, that said that I believe in DE&I believe in belonging and culture. I promote the idea of
mhm,
bringing your whole self to work, even though it was clearly disingenuous because they didn't want me to be my whole self. They only wanted me to be the part of them, of me that they could control and manipulate um, and exert influence over. Number one. So it attracts the narcissist. And then when you're in the interview stage, then you have to persuade a bunch of strangers that you are the right person for the job.
yeah,
And that requires some strategizing. That requires perhaps the same skill set that a Machiavellian type thrives in, which is being able to think 7, 8 steps ahead. And so right away, you attract the narcissists, you attract the Machiavellian types. But because these are so closely grouped by the dark core of leadership, you're not just attracting people who exhibit those at a subclinical level. Who's slipping through the cracks are the sadists, are the people who are engaging in moral disengagement, are the people who have dubious ethics, are the everyday psychopaths, the snakes in suits. And this is not conjecture. This is very well documented. There's such a plethora of research on the subject. I would actually recommend a great book on this that I have behind me called Corruptible by Dr. Brian Klaas. Fantastic book. I think it's like the spiritual successor to Snakes in Suits that shows just how prevalent these people are in the workplace. And in Snakes in Suits, if anything, underreported. They said 8 to 10% of CEOs have these traits. But I actually think that number is a lot higher. And I think that the reason why we don't know this is because it's only now here in 2024 that we're talking openly about this. But
Yes.
also, we're still experiencing the echo of the great man theory of leadership, where we're expecting our leaders to have all of the answers.
Hmm.
But there's a shift. And I heard you and Glenn talk about it in the last episode, which is the leaders need to actually be the ones who ask the questions, not have the answers. And so I love that this zeitgeist shift is happening. It makes me so happy that we're so openly talking about love in the workplace. I was remarking with my partner last night how surreal it is that most of some of the most brilliant people that I know, ranging from scholars to CEOs, are talking about energy in the workplace and spirituality in the workplace, and we're entertaining these ideas that seemed so distant from the lexicon that I experienced when I joined the world of work in the 2010s. All of this is to say, it was a heavy conversation that we had here, Kristen, but I do believe in my heart that we are moving in the right direction, that we are touching the band of energy, if you will, that
Yes.
seems to be moving towards rehumanizing workplaces. That seems to be where the rainbow ends.
I
Another
mean,
image behind you. Yeah.
I'm all always, my mind will always see possibilities and I'm the optimist, but I really truly believe. And I thank you so much for being here today, but really sharing your story and your journey so that people can really understand this is one version and there it can look very different. And we all get to be part of making these changes in our workplaces. And this is about being courageous and having the dialogues and helping paint the picture of what's possible and what we can create. And I hope everyone, and I know everyone, but I'm just hoping, but that you've all been inspired by this conversation. Thank you so much, Hamza.
Oh, thank you, my friend.
Where can people learn more about you and the amazing work you're doing in the world?
Oh, you're very kind. All of my links, all of my content, everything lives on or ties back to hamzakhan.ca. See, even though I divide my time and I spend most of it in the US, I'm still holding on to that .ca URL. HAMZA for my fellow Canadians, or ZA for my non-Canadians. Mostly Americans, really. I think Z is used a lot more throughout the world than Z, interestingly enough. So HAMZAKHAN, hamzakhan.ca is where you can learn about me. You can access the cornucopia of things that my team and I have put together that I have been trying to express for now just over 10 years. So
Mm,
thank you for allowing me to share that and share my story and to be part of this beautiful stream of consciousness that is ultimately leading to a more rehumanizing workplace, Kristen.
thank you so much. Appreciate everyone for being here today. And check out all of the work. Connect with us on LinkedIn. I love hearing about your thoughts on this episode. Please share with others. It gets the podcast in front of more people. And for anybody listening, if you want to learn more about how to have more emotionally intelligent leaders to create, have more, elevate that consciousness, I would love to have a conversation around one-on-one coaching, leadership training, keynote speaking. And for everyone, wherever you are in the world, we're saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, sending tons of love. Bye bye.